welcome back. Welcome to 5 tips for Hellcat winter operations. All right, guys, welcome back to the Hellcat Pilot channel. Today, I thought I would do something I've always been passionate about. And that's driving in the snow, and basically from the Hellcat's perspective. Hellcat winter ops, my 5 tips. And even though driving a Hellcat in some aspects is like driving in the snow anyway, even on a nice summer day, cue the video. But we can, there are some things we can do to make driving this big, beautiful, powerful beast a little easier to handle in the snow. Tip number 1 is to use your remote start. Use the remote start that Dodge gave you. Let the thing warm up. Nothing destroys a car faster than not letting it warm up. Not only does the remote start work great, has an awesome range, but it also does a few other things. When you turn it on, if it's below a certain temperature, it also activates the rear defroster. It activates the seat heat in the driver's side. It activates the heated rear view mirrors, side views. It activates the heated steering wheel, and of course turns on the environmental system to whatever setting you had it at. If it's an auto mode, it would, it's gonna warm it up to wherever you had it set. It also mutes the stereo. The stereo does not turn on until you sit down in the car and hit the red start stop button, which is nice. If you came home and you were jamming some tunes and had the speakers turned up, you'll blow out any cold speakers. I think that's a great item. The other really great thing about the Hellcat, some of the gadgetry in the Hellcat I love about the winter operations, during the warm-up of the car, you can see exactly what your coolant temperature is, and you can check the you can see trans temperature, and you can see the oil temperature before you ever drive off. My second tip for driving the Hellcat in the wintertime is actually, it's going to be a hodgepodge of a bunch of standard winter driving techniques. The Hellcat is or the Challenger Hellcat anyway, the one I own, is a pretty large, it's a big heavy car, and stopping this thing in the snow, it can be a little challenging. And no matter what car I'm driving, one of the biggest tips I can give somebody who's not used to winter driving, and I've lived in parts of this country where it snows a lot. Actually, I lived in South Dakota for 4 years while I was in the Air Force, and that is some brutal winters up there. But I always drive a car in the snow as if I don't have brakes. I see so many people get themselves into trouble driving in the snow by, as soon as they get into trouble, they mash on the brakes. And all that does is lock the tires. Once the tires are not turning anymore and clearing themselves or providing any type of traction, whatever energy you have is you're continuing in a straight line, whichever way you're already heading. If you're in a turn and you apply brakes, you're going to slide right out of the turn. The biggest tip I can give in winter driving is pretend you don't have brakes. And when you do have to brake, always brake in a straight line. Never brake in cornering. Always plan your stops way ahead of time. And most of your stops just, can be done by letting your foot off the accelerator is your number 1 tool. Increase your following distance, driving the tracks of other cars. These are all the standard go-to, tips, but the biggest one is pretend you don't have brakes. That's the best tip you can have, no matter what surface you're, what kind of snow you're driving on. And my third tip for Hellcat winter operations is to use valet mode. The Hellcat has you know, we have all these fancy controls in here for controlling the power and the traction and the suspension of the car. But I tell you, after driving around a little bit in the snow, this car, well, first of all, let me back up. First of all, the car does wonderful by already a good job with the traction control. It knows that it's in snow or on a slippery surface, and it kind of does this anyway, but I've noticed a couple times to where it had to think about it for a second before it switched into it. And what I'm talking about is whatever traction control mode where it completely keeps the wheels from spinning, it actually puts it into like a higher gear, and it doesn't allow you to, no matter how hard you mash on the accelerator, it doesn't give you the power. And I don't know if that's like some type of winter mode or what, but what I found is every now and then when you mash on the gas, it will let you give you wheel spin and whatever before it realizes the surface you're on, and then it goes into that mode. You can get rid of all that by just driving around in valet mode. If you put it in valet mode, you can drive around in the wintertime all you want. Valet mode gives you full traction control and the braking control. All that stuff is turned on to the max, and it also always starts you off in second gear. You don't get a choice. So it is, I found it to be the best way to drive around in this powerful rear-wheel drive car on snow-covered roads. Valet mode definitely gives you an advantage. Otherwise, you'll, I mean, you breathe on the gas pedal on this thing, and the tire wants the wheels want to break loose. So valet mode is definitely my choice for driving in the snow. The fourth tip that I have for Hellcat winter operations, and this one goes back to you know, airplane stuff. And this is a well-known airplane thing, and that is keep your tank full of gas. If your tank is full of gas, there's no way for moisture to form in the tank. You know, something that happens when you have a tank that's half full or a quarter way full, with the temperature changes, you'll get moisture that builds up on the inside of the tank, and that moisture, it'll beat up and it'll run down into your gas and give you a you know, a situation where you got water in your gas. However, you know, this isn't 1960 something, so they figured out that they can build a low spot in the gas tanks. Water is heavier than gas, it will always go to the bottom of the tank, and they built sumps into the tanks to where, you know, you won't be sucking water into the engine. But if you do it enough, eventually, you know, the water will splash around in there. It'll get mixed in with the gas. You will get water in there if you don't, you know, take some type of precaution against it. And that precaution is keeping your gas tank full in the wintertime as much as possible. Right, and the fifth tip I have for driving the Hellcat in the snow or snow operations is don't do it. If you got another car, drive it. Because to tell you the truth, it isn't really that fun. And what is even worse is the chemicals that you're going to end up in the car. So the actual fifth tip is to wash your car thoroughly. Take it to a car wash. It's probably too cold to use your hose, but take it to a car wash and really get up in the wheel well and in all the mechanical stuff underneath of it. You know, these chemicals they use on the road, if you're lucky enough to live in one of the states, they only use sand. That's great. But where I live, they use a mixture of sodium chloride, which is rock salt. They use a sodium salt brine stuff, which is a liquid they spray out. They use calcium chloride, which is another liquid that sprays out. I think that's for the thick ice stuff to get underneath of it or something. And then they mix some of that with beet juice, which I don't know if that harms your car or whatever. That's supposed to be better for the environment. Anyway, it's all bad stuff, and it gets into places of the car that you didn't even know existed, because some of this stuff is in a liquid format. And so really just you got to clean your car if you're going to take it out and drive it in the snow. If this is your first time here, make sure you subscribe. If you're watching this video on Facebook, please go into YouTube and actually subscribe. YouTube has changed their terms of service on how things work in there, and some of the smaller channels like this aren't going to stand a chance of going anywhere unless there are subscribers. So please go into YouTube and actually subscribe. Skytrack Outfitters. Skytrack Outfitters is now online. It's my merch shop where selling t-shirts with muscle car stuff, aviation stuff, basically just anything I think's neat, I'll put on there, and there's more products being added constantly, so check that out. And other than that, we'll see you guys next time.